The black dress was still on when Theodore Hargrove walked through the bedroom door. Rosalind had been reaching behind her back for the zipper, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion. She'd been up since 5 that morning, making butter tarts and perogies, and the kind of slow-cooked brisket that Gordon Sr. had always requested for family gatherings. She'd done it all by herself, standing in that kitchen in the dark, crying softly so nobody would hear, because Gordon Sr. deserved a proper send-off and someone had to make sure it happened. 14 years of marriage. 14 years of Sunday dinners and hospital visits, and driving that man to his chemotherapy appointments in Mississauga while her husband sent apology texts from whatever conference he was too important to leave. She expected grief on Theodore's face when he came in. Maybe they'd sit together on the edge of the bed and talk about the man who had built something real from nothing, who had come to Canada from Trinidad at 22 with $40 and a trade certificate, and had turned it into 3 commercial properties, and a reputation that stretched across the greater Toronto area. Maybe Theodore would cry. He never cried, but maybe today. He wasn't crying. He was loosening his tie with one hand and scrolling his phone with the other, and there was something wrong with his expression, a brightness behind his eyes that didn't belong at a funeral. They read the will early, he said, not looking up. Rosalind lowered her hands from the zipper. I thought that was next Thursday. James pulled me aside, wanted to give me the highlights. Theodore finally set down his phone and looked at her, and that was when she understood that something had shifted. Something permanent. The Brampton property, the warehouse in Hamilton, the condo portfolio, the business accounts. He said each item slowly, like he was tasting something expensive. All of it, Rose, every single piece. She waited. He left me everything. The word everything hung in the air between them. She should have felt something uncomplicated. Relief maybe, or the particular comfort of knowing that Gordon Sr. had taken care of his son, that 14 years of family dinners hadn't been for nothing. But Theodore's voice had a quality she'd never heard before. Thin and sharp, like a wire pulled too tight. That's wonderful, she said carefully. Your dad wanted to look after you, look after us. Theodore moved to the window. Below in the backyard, the neighbors were still gathered around the folding tables Rosalind had set up that morning. Her co-worker Diane was refilling the lemonade. The pastor was talking to Gordon Sr.'s old friend from the construction union. Normal grief. Normal people doing the small, necessary things that holding someone's death required. There's something else, Theodore said. Rosalind went still. Dad left you something too, James mentioned it. He turned from the window, and the look on his face. She would think about that look for a long time afterward, like he was already calculating. An envelope. Your name on it. He kept it separate from the estate documents. An envelope, she repeated. That's what James said. Theodore's mouth did something complicated. I guess Dad appreciated you, in his way. The last 2 words landed like a door closing. In his way. 14 years compressed into a polite afterthought. Where's Owen? Rosalind asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Still at your sister's with the cousins. I told Brenda to keep him until tomorrow. Tonight's not the night for an 8-year-old. Rosalind looked at her husband. The husband she had worked alongside through a failed renovation business. Through the year he'd lost his contractor's license, and they'd lived on her teacher's salary alone. Through the depression that had kept him in bed for 3 months while she covered every bill and made his excuses to his father, and told Owen that Daddy was just very tired, and she waited for him to say something that sounded like the man she'd married. Things are going to look different now, Theodore said. I need you to understand that. I'm not the same person I was last week. I have options now. Real options. The room tilted slightly. What are you saying? He sighed. Not unkindly. Almost worse than unkind, patient, like he was explaining something to someone who was going to be fine eventually. I'm saying that people change when their circumstances change. I've spent 15 years feeling like I was never going to catch up, to my dad, to his expectations, to where I thought I'd be by 40. And now, he opened his hands, palms up. Now I can actually be the person I was supposed to be. The person you were supposed to be, she said. You'll be okay, Rose. You're a teacher. You have your pension, your benefits, you're practical. You've always been practical. He picked his phone back up. I need to make some calls, there's a lot to sort through. He left the room without kissing her. Rosalind stood in the middle of their bedroom and looked at herself in the full-length mirror on the back of the closet door. Same face. Dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Hair she'd pressed flat for the funeral already starting to curl back at the edges from the August humidity. Through the window she could hear laughter downstairs. Someone was telling a story about Gordon Sr. The time he'd argued with a city inspector for 45 minutes about a load-bearing wall and won. People remembered him for that. His certainty. His refusal to be dismissed. His son was up here dismissing his wife 40 minutes after the man's body was in the ground. Rosalind went back downstairs. She smiled and accepted condolences and made sure the brisket was warm and pressed extra butter tarts into the hands of Gordon Sr.'s old friends, and she did all of it while something quiet and resolute was settling in her chest like concrete curing. Whatever was in that envelope, she would survive this. She had no idea survival wasn't going to be the ceiling. The office of Hargrove Sr.'s solicitor was on King Street West, 23rd floor, the kind of place where the furniture was real wood, and the receptionist knew your name before you'd introduced yourself. James Okafor had handled Gordon Sr.'s affairs for over 2 decades. Just when Rosalind came in, and the way he looked at her, careful, watchful, the way people look at someone who doesn't yet know what they're about to receive, made the hair on her arms rise. She hadn't slept. Theodore had come to bed late smelling like scotch and had not touched her, not even accidentally, and in the morning she'd found a real estate brochure for a condominium in Liberty Village on the kitchen counter. Mrs. Hargrove. James gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming, James." She sat. Her purse felt heavy. She'd brought her SIM card, her passport, the folder of documents she kept for important occasions. The life of a person who has always been practical. Placed a manila envelope on the desk between them. Old. The kind of thick acid-free paper that archivists use. Her name was written across the front in Gordon Sr.'s particular handwriting. Precise, slanted left, the pen pressed firmly enough to leave texture on the surface. For Rosalind, to be opened by her alone. "He brought this to me 8 months ago," James said quietly, "right after his second cardiac event. He was very clear. It wasn't to be included in the will reading. It wasn't to be mentioned to Theodore." He paused. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, he said, "James, my boy is about to show you who he really is. When he does, make sure Rosalind has this." Rosalind pressed her fingers flat against the envelope. She could feel something rigid inside. Not just paper. "Did he tell you what was in it?" "No, but he told me enough." James stood. "I'll give you some time." The door clicked shut. She sat with the envelope for a long moment. Gordon Sr. had walked her down the aisle when her own father couldn't make it from Nova Scotia because of the ice storm. He'd shown up at the school where she taught every spring to give a talk to her grade 7s about the construction trades. He'd once driven 40 minutes in a February snowstorm to bring her soup when she was sick. And Theodore was in Vancouver for work. She opened the envelope. Inside, a letter, handwritten, 4 pages. And beneath the letter, a card. A bank card with her name embossed on the front. Her hands weren't steady, but she read. "My dear Rosalind, if you're reading this, then James has given you the envelope separately. Which means Theodore has done what I feared he might. I want to tell you something that I should have said years ago. You are the reason that boy didn't fall apart completely. Not me, not his mother, God rest her, you. You held the household together when he lost his license. You covered his debts without telling anyone. You raised Owen to be kind and curious and good-hearted. And you did most of that alone while my son was finding himself. I'm not a fool, Rosalind. I know my son. I know what money does to people who aren't ready for it. I knew that the moment he had something real in his hands, he would want a different life to go with it. I prayed I was wrong. I have never wanted to be right less. The card enclosed is connected to an account in your name. I opened it 6 years ago. I have been contributing to it from assets Theodore never knew about. Investment properties in Guelph and Barrie, held in a separate numbered company, proceeds from the sale of my father's property in Trinidad that I never told Theodore existed because I wanted to see who he'd become before I decided what to do with it. The current balance is $19,400,000. The letter fell out of her hands. Rosalind picked it up. Read the number again. Read it a 3rd time. More than Theodore's inheritance. More than she would make in a 12 lifetimes of teaching. This is yours, free and clear, properly documented, taxes paid, no claim against it from the estate. James helped me structure it so that the law is very clear. I made a gift. It has been growing for years. Theodore cannot touch it. But Rosalind, please be careful. Don't tell him yet. Get yourself safe first. Get a lawyer. Protect Owen. And then, when you're ready, when you're standing on solid ground, you can decide what you want the rest of your life to look like. You were the daughter I never had. I am so sorry it cost you this. With all my love, Gordon. She was crying before she reached the signature. Ugly, shaking sobs that she pressed into the sleeve of her jacket. The solicitor's office had a box of tissues on the credenza, and she used half of them. James came back in after a while. He didn't say anything. Just set a cup of tea in front of her and sat down and waited. 19 million, she finally said. 19.4. The investments have continued to compound. He opened a folder on the desk. It's all documented. Every transaction, every transfer, every tax filing. His accountant and I spent nearly 2 years making sure this was bulletproof. He slid the folder across. Gordon was meticulous. He always was, she said softly. He also left a video message. For you only. James turned his laptop toward her. When you're ready. She nodded. On the screen, Gordon Sr. sat in this same chair, thinner than she remembered from Christmas, but his eyes clear and direct and completely himself. James pressed play. Hello, my girl. His voice filled the room and she pressed her hand over her mouth. I want to explain something. The money Theodore got, I gave it to him deliberately. Because I needed to know. I needed to see whether 14 years of watching you love that boy and hold that family together. Whether any of it had changed him. Whether he'd grown into someone who deserved what I was leaving him. A long pause. I knew in my gut he'd fail. I prayed every night that I was wrong about my own son. His jaw tightened slightly. I wasn't. He leaned forward. You, Rosalind. You would have done something good with it. It would have taken care of Owen and your sister and probably half your neighborhood, and you wouldn't have thought twice about it. That is who you are. That is why you're getting more. He almost smiled. Use it well. Be free. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small again. The video ended. Rosalind sat very still for a moment, then she straightened her back, picked up the folder and looked at James Okafor across the desk. I need a family lawyer, she said, the best one you know. James was already reaching into his drawer. I was hoping you'd say that. The name he gave her was Catherine Souza, and her office was in a glass tower in Yorkville that made Rosalind feel slightly underdressed. Catherine herself was 50, compact, with reading glasses pushed up into natural gray hair and the kind of calm that came from winning. Tell me everything, Catherine said, leave nothing out. So Rosalind did. The 14 years. The failed business. The debts she'd covered. The chemotherapy drives for a father-in-law who'd meant more to her than her own husband had for the past several years. The Liberty Village brochure. The way Theodore had looked at her in the bedroom, patient and distant, like he was already somewhere else. Catherine wrote everything down without expression. First thing, she said when Rosalind finished. You're going to be better than fine, significantly better. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. Here's what we do. We file for divorce on the grounds of marriage breakdown with evidence of constructive abandonment. We freeze all joint accounts before he can move anything. We document the marital debt, the years you covered his losses, the support you provided during his license suspension. Because in Ontario, that matters. She looked up. And Owen stays with you. He mentioned taking Owen. Rosalind's voice was very controlled. He could give him opportunities. He can want whatever he likes. Catherine's expression didn't change. What he can't do is walk away from a 14-year marriage, abandon the family home for a Liberty Village condo, and walk into a courtroom and convince a judge that he's the stable choice. She paused. Does he know about Gordon's gift to you? Not yet. Good. We keep it that way until we're ready. Catherine almost smiled. When the time is right, we let him know that the woman he dismissed is not who he thinks she is. People negotiate very differently, once they understand who they're actually negotiating with. Theodore came home that Friday evening, with the particular energy of someone who had been making plans. He'd bought new shoes. He smelled like a restaurant Rosalind didn't recognize. He told her he'd spoken to an interior decorator about the house. He told her he was considering a different school for Owen. Somewhere private. Somewhere that reflected their new position. He told her he'd put a deposit on the Liberty Village unit, that it would be ready by November, that the separation could be handled efficiently, if they both stayed practical about it. You already made a deposit, Rosalind said. It makes sense to move quickly in this market. Theodore. She kept her voice level. We've been married for 14 years, and we've grown in different directions. That happens. He sat down at the kitchen island and opened his laptop. The conversation apparently concluded. I've had a lawyer draft a separation agreement. It's reasonable. You keep the car, the furniture, your RRSP. I'll pay child support at the provincial guideline rate. We alternate weekends with Owen. Alternate weekends. Owen, who slept with a stuffed polar bear named Gerald. Owen, who called her 3 times from school on bad days. Owen, who had asked her last Tuesday whether Daddy was mad at them. I'll have my lawyer look at it, Rosalind said quietly. Theodore glanced up. You have a lawyer? I found one. Something moved across his face. The first real uncertainty she'd seen since the funeral. Then he closed his laptop and went upstairs. She didn't confront him about the woman until Diane told her. Diane taught gym at the same school, had been Rosalind's closest friend for 9 years, and arrived at her door on a Wednesday evening with the expression of someone who'd been sitting on information that was burning a hole through them. "There's someone," Diane said simply, setting a bottle of red wine on the counter. "Her name is Petra. I saw them at Alo last Saturday." He had his hand on her back. Rosalind poured 2 glasses. "How long do you think?" "I don't know." "The way they looked." Diane shook her head. "Not new." Rosalind thought about the business trips, the late calls, the way Theodore had stopped asking how her day had gone sometime around 3 years ago and she'd just quietly stopped noticing. "Does it change anything for you?" Diane asked. "It changes the legal strategy," Rosalind said. Diane looked at her for a long moment. "Roz, are you okay, honestly?" Rosalind wrapped both hands around her wine glass. "I'm terrified about Owen. Everything else I can survive. But the thought of him using money to fight me for Owen. He's not getting Owen. He's got $18 million, Diane. You've got a 14-year track record, every teacher in that school, your whole neighborhood, and whatever Gordon left you." Diane raised her eyebrow. "Which, you still haven't told me." Rosalind told her. The silence that followed lasted a full 10 seconds. $19.4 million, Diane said. "Approximately, Gordon Sr. left you more than Theodore." "Yes." Diane picked up her wine glass, set it back down, picked it up again. "Theodore has absolutely no idea." "Not yet." "Oh," Diane said softly. And then she laughed, the real kind, helpless and relieved, the kind that comes when something has been terrifying for a long time and suddenly the ground shifts. "Oh, Rosalind." The hearing was set for a Thursday in October. Catherine Souza had filed in September. The day after Theodore's lawyer sent a letter claiming Rosalind was emotionally unstable and seeking primary custody of Owen on the grounds that she was financially incapable of providing for him. Rosalind had read that letter 4 times. Then she'd called Catherine. "Let him think he has the upper hand," Catherine said. "Let him spend his money on lawyers and private investigators. We're building something he can't touch." Theodore did hire a private investigator. The investigator followed Rosalind for 2 weeks. He photographed her taking Owen to school, to swimming lessons, to his pediatric checkup. He photographed her at the grocery store, at parent-teacher conferences, at her sister's house in Etobicoke on a Sunday afternoon. The photographs, when Catherine eventually obtained them through disclosure, showed a mother doing exactly what mothers do. Theodore's lawyer presented them in court as evidence of what, precisely, was never clear. The courtroom was on University Avenue, a room with high ceilings and the particular weight of decisions being made. Catherine had told Rosalind to wear something modest and to let herself look tired, because she was tired, and judges noticed people who were performing composure versus people who were living through something. She wore her good gray blazer and the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. Theodore sat at the respondent's table with his lawyer, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, and he didn't look at Rosalind when she came in. He was looking at his phone. Then he put his phone away and looked at the bench, and Rosalind thought about all the times she'd needed him to look at her, and he'd been looking at something else. On the gallery benches, Diane, pressed and serious. Owen's teacher, Miss Nakamura, who had come on her day off and was still wearing her lunch-duty lanyard. Pastor Adiemi from their church in Brampton. Gordon Sr.'s old friend Walt, 81 years old and still straight as a post, who had driven in from Oakville. Rosalind's sister Brenda, who had brought tissues and used them before the hearing even started. And in the back corner, very still, a woman Rosalind didn't recognize until she met her eyes. Petra. She wasn't there for Theodore. Rosalind understood that immediately from the way the woman held herself. Taut, private. Something worked out in advance. She gave Rosalind a small nod. The judge was the Honorable Louise Tremblay, 60-something, Quebecoise by her accent, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the expression of someone who had seen every version of this particular story, and was not easily moved by money. Theodore's lawyer went first. He outlined Theodore's inheritance, his plans for Owen's education, his intention to provide opportunities that a public school teacher's salary could not. He touched on Rosalind's emotional volatility, following the death of her father-in-law, citing, as evidence, the fact that she had cried at the funeral. He mentioned that she had been observed taking Owen to a medical appointment without informing Theodore in advance, which he characterized as pattern of exclusion. Justice Tremblay looked up from her notes. "Counsel, are you suggesting that taking a child to a scheduled pediatrician appointment is evidence of parental unfitness?" Theodore's lawyer recalibrated quickly. He pivoted to finances. "Your Honor, Mr. Hargrove is in a significantly stronger position to provide stability. Financial stability and parental stability are not synonyms." Justice Tremblay said. Please continue. Theodore's lawyer continued. He brought up the separation agreement Theodore had drafted, the one Rosalind hadn't signed. He suggested she was being obstructive, mentioned, with a careful casualness, that Theodore had been in communication with a woman who was prepared to testify that she had witnessed Rosalind drinking wine in front of Owen. That witness, Catherine said, rising from the applicant's table, is Mr. Hargrove's girlfriend. The woman he was involved with during the marriage. She has declined to testify. Catherine set a printed email on the court officer's desk. In fact, she has provided a statement to the court, indicating that Mr. Hargrove asked her to fabricate the incident, and that she refused. The courtroom was very quiet. Justice Tremblay looked at Theodore. Is this accurate? Theodore's lawyer leaned over and whispered something. Theodore's jaw was tight. No response, his lawyer said. I see. Justice Tremblay made a note. Catherine called Mrs. Nakamura first. Owen's teacher spoke for 6 minutes about a parent who knew every child's name in the classroom, who had organized the winter clothing drive 3 years running, who had once stayed late to help Owen work through a rough week after Gordon Sr.'s first hospital admission. He talks about his mum the way kids talk about their safe people. Mrs. Nakamura said, like she's the fixed point. Walt testified about Gordon Sr.'s explicit wishes. He'd had a conversation with the man 2 months before his death. Gordon told me he was worried about his boy, Walt said. But he said Rosalind would be fine. Said she was the kind of person who gets stronger when things get hard. Said he'd made sure of it. Justice Tremblay looked up from her notes at that. Made sure of it, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. Pastor Adeyemi spoke about Rosalind's work with the community food bank she'd organized out of the church basement. Diane testified about 14 years of steady, unremarkable, attentive motherhood. Brenda testified about the year Theodore's business failed and Rosalind had quietly borrowed money from their mother's estate to cover a debt she'd never told anyone about. Theodore's lawyer objected to much of this. Justice Tremblay overruled him 4 times, and Catherine stood and said, Your Honor, with respect to Mr. Hargrove's argument that financial resources should be a deciding factor in this custody determination, I'd like to address that directly. She looked at Theodore's lawyer, then at Theodore. My client is not in need of Mr. Hargrove's financial support. She is not in need of his charity. She is not, as opposing counsel has implied, a woman who cannot provide for her son. Catherine placed a certified document on the court officer's desk. 6 years ago, Gordon Hargrove Sr. established an account in my client's name. The account has been properly documented, the taxes paid, the gift legally recorded. The current value of that account is $19.4 million. She paused to let the number settle. Mr. Hargrove's inheritance is $18 million. His father left his daughter-in-law more than he left his son, because he knew his son, and he made sure Rosalind was protected. The sound in the courtroom was almost nothing. A breath. A shift. Theodore's face had gone a color Rosalind didn't have a name for. Furthermore, Catherine continued, we have documentation of Mr. Hargrove's spending since his father's death, approximately $340,000 in 6 weeks, including a condominium deposit, vehicle purchases, and restaurant charges, suggesting he has been entertaining extensively. We have records of the private investigator he hired to follow my client. We have records of his attempt to suborn false testimony. She set the last document down. This is a man who received a significant inheritance, and spent the following weeks trying to take a child away from the woman who raised him. Not because he's a devoted father, because he doesn't want to lose. Justice Tremblay was quiet for a long time. Mr. Hargrove, she said finally. Theodore looked up. I want you to understand something. I have sat in this courtroom for 22 years. I have heard many fathers tell me they want full custody. Very few of them can tell me what their child had for breakfast on any given Tuesday. She looked at him steadily. Can you tell me what Owen had for breakfast last Tuesday? Theodore said nothing. Mrs. Hargrove, can you? Peanut butter on a whole wheat bagel and half a glass of orange juice, Rosalind said quietly. He wanted pancakes, but we were running late. Justice Tremblay nodded once. Full physical custody to Mrs. Hargrove. Mr. Hargrove will have supervised access every second weekend, to be reviewed after completion of a parenting support program. She looked at Theodore's lawyer. I am also referring the matter of the attempted witness interference to the Law Society and the relevant Crown Office. That is not something this court takes lightly. The gavel came down. We're adjourned. The autumn was quieter than Rosalind had expected. Theodore did not appeal. His lawyer, she heard through Catherine, had advised against it. He moved into the Liberty Village condo. He and Petra, apparently, did not last past November. Owen came home from his first supervised visit with his father and sat at the kitchen table eating the grilled cheese Rosalind had made and said, very carefully, "Dad seemed kind of sad." "Sometimes people get sad," Rosalind said. "Are you sad?" She thought about it honestly, the way he deserved. "Sometimes, but mostly I feel like we're going to be okay." Owen considered this. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." She called Catherine that evening to discuss the financial settlement. She called the principal of the school she taught at to begin the conversation about a leave of absence. And then she called Gordon Sr.'s accountant, a meticulous woman named Frances who had been managing the account for 6 years. And they talked for an hour about what might be possible. Community health center, Rosalind had been thinking. The neighborhood around her school had been asking for years. A drop-in for kids after school. A food literacy program. Something real, something built to last. Frances said it was entirely doable. The center opened 18 months later in a renovated building on Dundas West, 2 blocks from the school where Rosalind had taught for 11 years. Owen cut the ribbon with an enormous pair of ceremonial scissors, grinning so wide she could see where he'd lost a molar. "My mum built this," he told everyone who would listen. He was 9 now, a little taller, wearing the same polar bear backpack he'd had since grade 1. She said Grandpa Gordon wanted her to. Gordon Sr.'s old friend Walt was there, leaning on his cane in the afternoon light, and when Rosalind found him in the crowd he put his hand on her arm and said simply, he'd be so proud. She believed him. On the 1-year anniversary of Gordon Sr.'s death, she sat on the front porch of the house. Her house now, bought out from the settlement, repainted a deep green she'd always loved, and she read his letter again. She'd read it many times. She knew it almost by heart. "You were the daughter I never had." The evening was cool the way October evenings in Ontario are cool. The kind of cold that smells like leaf mulch and wood smoke, and the particular finality of a year ending. Owen was inside doing homework. The neighbors were walking their dog. Down the street, someone was having a bonfire, and the smell of it drifted all the way to the porch. Rosalind folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. The same envelope, worn soft now at the corners, and held it for a moment in both hands. Gordon Sr. had given her money. He had given her protection. He had given her a fighting chance when she hadn't known she needed one. But what he'd really given her, she understood now, was the reminder that she had always been worth protecting. The years of showing up, for Owen, for a father-in-law who wasn't her blood, for a marriage that was held together mostly by her own hands. That none of that had been invisible. Someone had seen it. Someone had counted it. Someone had made sure it mattered. She didn't need the money to know her own worth. She'd known it, somewhere underneath everything, for years. The envelope had just made it impossible to pretend otherwise.